Hello everyone and welcome to the game you've all been waiting for. It is the second half of Norway Chess and we have world champion Gukesh facing former world champion Magnus Carlsen. In their previous clash in the first half of the tournament, Magnus won a very nice game, and now of course Gukesh would very much like to not only get his revenge, not only improve his standings in the tournament, but also maybe get his first ever classical win against Magnus Carlsen. So let's check it out. It's quite the game. Let's dive straight into it. Gukesh with white opens with pawn to e4. We have pawn to e5 by Magnus, knight f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5. So the Ruy Lopez is on the board. We have knight to f6 going for the Berlin defense against the Ruy Lopez, and pawn to d3 by Gukesh. We have bishop to c5, pawn to c3, castles kingside by Magnus, castles by Gukesh, and pawn to d6. So all been played before, nothing new here. h3, we have pawn to a6, bishop to a4, and pawn to h6. Even following a game Magnus already played against Hikaru. We have rook to e1, pawn to b5, we have bishop to c2, and now, like I said, there are a couple of games that read this position. Bishop to b7 is a known move. Magnus played rook to e8 against Hikaru in this position in the World Blitz Championship of 2019, but here we have the immediate unprovoked bishop to b6, and it is now as of move 10 that we have a completely new game. To which Gukesh replies with simply developing. Knight b to d2. Okay, we have knight to e7 by Magnus. You know that now he will start advancing that c-pawn, and pawn to a4. Gukesh strikes on the flank. We have rook to b8 by Magnus, and now he also strikes in the center. Pawn to d4. So, okay, again, nothing new here. These are all very, very natural moves that we see pretty much every game. We have knight to g6, knight to f1, and pawn to c5. Advancing the pawn, attacking Gukesh's strong center. Knight to g3 and c captures on d4. We have c captures and b captures on a4. Capturing away from the center, which is, you know, a little bit weird, but if it works, it works. We have b captures on a4, and Magnus develops with bishop to b7. Now, there are moves, other moves, of course, you could make. You could maybe make an argument for b4, but you can also make one in any position. Here, Gukesh just goes pawn to d5, which is very strong, as it sort of gets this light square bishop completely out of the game. So Magnus will either have to bring it back to c8 to activate it via this diagonal, or play a5 to activate it via this diagonal. He does so right away. He plays pawn to a5, but now after bishop to e3, offering a trade of bishops, now Magnus goes bishop back to c8. Okay, we have pawn to b3, defending the bishop, also gaining control of that c4 square, but maybe even preparing rook to a2 so you can use the second rank for the rook. Magnus trades bishops. We have bishop captures on e3, rook captures, and now knight to f4. We have bishop to c6, just getting the bishop to a very nice square, and now everyone was expecting Magnus to play bishop captures on h3. It would be a very interesting move that doesn't give black, you know, that much objectively. I mean, it is the strongest move that black can make, but after, let's say, knight to f4 checking g1 and knight to g4, it's very, very hard to actually find moves for white. And if anything, due to knight h3, knight f4 checks, you can never lose this game. So, you know, it's not a bad practical decision. Magnus goes for a different idea. He goes rook to b4, and this is pretty standard. Magnus sort of you know, localizes the weakness in the position. e4 is weak, and he will now go after it with many pieces. Currently with the knight and the rook, but other pieces will join the party. We have queen to c2. Gukesh adds a defender, and pawn to g6. We have king to h1. Bishop to a6, and okay, now if you lose control over that d3 square, bishop to d3 will be quite a powerful move. We have queen to a2 by Gukesh, immediately allowing Magnus this move, and Magnus plays it. We have bishop to d3, so probably Gukesh shouldn't have allowed that, but okay. We have knight to d2, Gukesh adds another defender, and Magnus plays pawn to h5. He's ready to kick away one of the defenders of e4, and then just gobble it up, and then d5 becomes weak, gobble up that, and then start advancing his two connected pass pawns in the center towards victory. Gukesh captures on a5, we have queen captures on a5, a queen trade occurs, rook captures on a5, and Magnus goes pawn to h4, to which Gukesh does not react by moving the knight, rather he goes rook to a4, which is a very interesting move. for example, you might be thinking, why not just capture the rook and then grab a free knight? Well, it's not really a free knight, because after captures and whatever captures, h captures and g3, there's also f captures, and now you're going to remove the defender of the bishop on d3. So it's nothing spectacular. No one loses like captures. You can also capture on d5, captures, and captures. Let's say king g7. And it's a nice game. White is up a pawn, but black should be able to hold this. So, okay, after rook a4, we have rook f to b8. Magnus plays the, well, strongest and probably the only winning move that wins by force, and that is rook f to b8. We have rook back to a2, and now he just goes king to g7. Now capturing here, for example, captures, and knight to e2. The problem is there's rook captures on d3, and now knight to c1. So you could also definitely play that, which Magnus did not. But okay, he goes king to g7, improving the position. There's nothing wrong with that. You either capture the knight on the next move, or the knight moves and then Magnus starts gobbling up on e4. We have rook to a7. Gukesh tries to play an active game, but now capturing on g3, for example, if you play h captures on g3 and f captures, it's still fine. Only, you know, you will have to play either knight captures on h3, or you're going to have to play knight captures on e4, but you still can play it. Captures, and now bishop captures on e4 with check, as you do have full control over the e4 square, and that rook to a7 move doesn't really do all that much. But Magnus played rook to d4. He wants to win without giving Gukesh anything. He doesn't want to allow him to have a move. He just says, okay, I'm going to capture, and I will have my bishop defended, so it doesn't really matter if I move the knight from f4. We have knight to f3, Gukesh goes after the rook, and now finally h captures on g3, f captures, and Magnus plays knight captures on h3. G captures on h3. Again, there's this very interesting idea of knight captures on d4, but the problem is after e captures on d4 and rook captures on d3, look at this, knight f2 check. And you lose the rook. King g1, knight captures on d3, and black will just be up a full piece, a full knight. So after knight captures on h3, we have g captures and bishop captures on e4. Magnus finally gobbles up that pawn, and now the d5 is falling next. King h2, Gukesh unpins from the bishop on e4. Rook to d1. Again, Magnus playing beautiful chess here. Now if the knight moves, rook to h1 will be checkmate. So Gukesh strikes with g4. This gives him some breathing room for the king on g3. And Magnus gobbles up a second pawn. Bishop captures on d5. We have bishop captures, knight captures on d5, attacking the rook, and rook to e2, and just knight to f4. And now all that's left is to start advancing those pawns. And even though it seems like you could maybe capture on e5, doesn't really do all that much. Even if you eliminate all of them, I mean, the extra knight is just too powerful. And maybe if Magnus's king was a little bit open, maybe it would work, but after captures, you're just getting forcefully checkmated here. There is really nothing you can do. There's no rook a2, it's just, rook captures on h3, so there's really nothing here. So after knight to f4, rook to c2 was played, and now we have king to f6. Magnus boldly starts marching forward with his king, pawn to h4, and king to e6 now. We have knight to g5, and now it would be a big mistake if Magnus went king f6, then rook captures on f7 is mate in 1, but Magnus boldly goes forward. King d5, we have rook to a5 with check, king to d4, and now rook to a4 with check. We have king to d3, and rook to f2. And now Magnus played, I will show you what he should have played. He should have played f5. And it has nothing to do with the knight or with the pawn. It has to do with taking away the e4 square from both the rook and the knight. And now once Gukesh starts checking, rook f3 check, king to c2, rook to a2 check, and you go to king to b1, there are no problems there. Even if rook f2 maybe threatening some sort of a perpetual, you're just going to capture on b3, and that's all there is. But Magnus played pawn to f6, and they don't say for nothing, never play f6. Rook to f3 check, and now should Magnus go to c2 like we've discussed in the line just shown, there's knight e4. And now look at this. Even if you play something like rook captures on b3, which seemingly you can, rook to c4 check. And after king to b2, there's rook to f2 check, and after king to a3, there's the annoying knight c3 threatening rook to a2 checkmate. And now the only thing you have would be to capture on c3, but okay, then rook captures, and then, you know, you're up the exchange. Maybe you don't win this, but you're definitely not losing this. So that's not what Magnus wants. Magnus goes king to e2. He still wants to win the game. We have rook to a2 with check, and now rook to d2 blocking. Gukesh trades. We have captures, knight to e4 with check. We have king to e2 and king to g3. And Magnus now starts marching his pawn. Pawn to d5, knight captures on f6, and now we have rook to f8. Rook to d8, maybe another way for Magnus to just put a rook behind the passed pawn and push it. But he goes rook to f8, and now rook to f2 check, king to e1, and knight to d7, attacking the rook and the e5 pawn. And what should Magnus do here? That is the question. He should play rook to e8. And now the point is, after you play knight captures on e5 to remove the defender of the knight, Magnus first goes knight to e2 check, and you have nothing better than to capture here. Otherwise, you're just going to be down a piece and lose the game. So you're going to have to capture, and after captures, you'll play king f4 to defend your knight, and okay, the game continues, but Magnus is the one pushing. However, after knight to d7, we reach the position from the thumbnail, knight to e2 check. And just look at this position a little bit. Magnus gives up a knight in order to start advancing his passed pawn, and it would be instantly winning if there was not one thing wrong with it. And Gukesh found it, but the question is, will you guys find it as well? So rook captures on e2 with check, king captures, knight captures on f8, and Magnus starts marching forward, d4, d3, d2, d1. If that gets in, then Magnus wins the game. But look at this, knight to e6, d3, we have knight to c5, and now the problem is, if Magnus goes d2, then knight to e4, and if d1 queen, then knight to c3 check. And you know, it's one of a kind. It's there, and Gukesh found it. King to d2, captures, and you know, king f3, you stop e4, you make a pass pawn, and you win the game easily. So after knight to c5, Magnus played the only thing he could. He played king to e3 to prevent knight from coming to e4. But now there is only one winning move for Gukesh. Feel free to pause the video and find it. Find the only move that wins, and win the first ever classical game for Gukesh against Magnus Carlsen. Yes, you have to reach c3, and even though e4 has been taken away, Gukesh plays knight to a4. And you can see the clock times. All of this has been played with seconds on the clock, so it was incredibly intense. And now the problem is d2. You can even just go knight b2. You know, you have to go c3. You have the d1 square covered. h5 next. It just wins the game easily for Gukesh. So after knight a4, Magnus played pawn to e4. We have h5. Gukesh also wants a pass pawn. Captures, and king to d2. Now Magnus wants to start advancing the e-pawn, because, okay, even if Gukesh queens and Magnus queens second, you know, still two queens on the board, a lot can happen. But Gukesh goes knight to b2, and now after e3, knight to c4 with check. And the problem is, if you go to c3, look at this, h6, e2, king f2, and the pawns are not going anywhere. You cannot queen this pawn, you cannot bring the king in as the knight is hanging. If you capture, then how are you ever promoting those pawns? And if you go d2, hoping for d1 or e1, just king captures. That's all there is to it. The knight will not move, the knight will not capture. This is covered as well, and if king c2, just knight captures and you promote the pawn. So after knight to c4 check, Magnus played king to e2, now getting ready to advance the d pawn to victory. But now Gukesh finished in the most beautiful way possible. He just played king to f4, and he was in this position on move 62 that Magnus Carlsen resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So there you have it. First ever classical win by Gukesh versus Magnus Carlsen, a historic moment, and in a game where Magnus was he was pushing, he was better for the entire game, but unfortunately Magnus didn't do what he usually does best. You know, you don't you always have to play the strongest possible move. Gukesh was playing even in a even in a losing position. Gukesh was just playing you know, the best possible move, the best possible move, the best possible move, and Magnus was constantly playing second best, second best, second best, second best, and then he allowed the position to be a draw again, and then he blundered the game, and Gukesh just won. So I can't even imagine, you know, playing all of these moves with 10 seconds on the clock constantly against Magnus. This is a very well-deserved victory and a great chance for Gukesh to bounce back, you know, in the tournament, because, you know, it doesn't get better than this, beating Magnus in classical. Now Gukesh could just, you know, go on a rampage and just obliterate everyone in classical section for the rest of the tournament. But we'll see what happens. You know, it's a great tournament to watch. So yeah, here we resign because d2 will just be met with knight captures on e3. The d1 square is covered, and that's it. Even though you can win the knight, it doesn't really matter. Gukesh has two pawns that will become queens, and that's pretty much it. So yeah, beautiful victory by the current world champion versus the former world champion. Beautifully done. We'll see what happens in the rest of the tournament, and I will also cover some other games from this round, and then we are going to discuss the final standings. But yeah, Gukesh takes some elo for Magnus, gains some elo, gets closer to 2800. You know, very much looking forward to see what happens next. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Nidhi Kumar, Robert Aratun, Carlos Salinas, London Initiative for Safe AI, and Ricardo Paulin for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. And I forgot to mention, you know, as the game concluded, Magnus congratulated Gukesh, and obviously he was so distraught that he, you know, shattered the pieces all over the board. He picked them up afterwards, but it was, yeah, it was a very, very intense moment for him. See you soon.